Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And first of all, I didn't get that much time, or I should say energy, to play EVE Online so far this week. The main reason is here in Belgium it has been like 32 degrees Celsius, which is extremely hot. If on top of that, like me, you have to work from home, yeah, that's a combination that saps your energy quite heavily, and as a result I've actually had to use most of the evenings just trying whatever I can to cool down the house a little bit and to rest so that I can just get back to work the next day. It's unfortunate, but things should look up and temperatures should look down starting next week, so hopefully I find a little bit more energy to put into EVE Online and the channel. Next up, we do have an interesting item that CCP released, basically sort of a dev blog talking about some economic numbers that they've seen in the first quarter for EVE Online, comparing them to the last quarter of last year, where they basically released their intention to do something about the resource proliferation, do something about botting, and so mostly I think I'm in line with what the report says, is that we're seeing improvements on how we feel about our efforts being rewarded in the game. Is the time that you spend in EVE Online indeed something that's worthwhile? Do you feel like you're getting rewarded? And especially, of course, I think they also mentioned that the mineral prices going up does mean that you get a feeling that even if you're a solo miner, a small scale miner, even if you're not mining in a Rorcal, if that's what you enjoy doing in EVE Online, it now is actually worth it to go out there in my Orca, in my instance, and just, you know, spend a little bit of time mining, compressing that, bringing it to the market. You're getting a decent amount of ISK back. They also mentioned that plex prices are decreasing, but here I think I would have gone with a more nuanced approach. They're basically telling us that it's not necessarily all, but basically they're telling us it's because they're fighting bots and they're successful at fighting bots. And I think that, well, that's of course a very nice story when prices go down, but in my opinion, EVE Online, a virtual currency like ISK is inevitably inflationary in nature, and so inevitably at some point prices are going to go back up. And of course now with this dev block it could really make it look like they're no longer caring about botting when plex prices go back up, and CCP doesn't ring the alarms and starts ban waves and things like that. So yeah, I'd say I'd have been a little bit more careful putting that strong an emphasis on lower plex prices and the fight on bots, although it will undoubtedly be one of the big reasons why plex prices have been decreasing. I thought it was a very interesting dev block, for sure, and basically it was very much in line with how I felt things had evolved after the resource crunch and potentially, of course, as well the fight on botting and things like that. Next up, let's take a quick look at the new Eden store here. Let's see if there's anything new or on sale. Yeah, we have Luminaire Rising skins that are actually on sale right now, 175 instead of 250. We've got some bundles front and center, and we have, yeah, still same thing here on the new, the ones that with the tag new, the Eden Hunter skin and the Kybernaut Clade skins. And then we get some more Luminaire Rising skins that are on sale. Nyx Rovner's Bequest skin also seems to be on sale. Pretty cool, but yeah, a Nyx is not that easy to get to. Anyways, looks like it is pretty much unchanged from last week. So we get to move on to the market, and as always, we'll start with plex and stuff that's coming in at 415. Like that. Alright, well, let's get started then with that plex chart and let's see what we got here. So maybe already a first nuance, of course. The fight against bots has been going on for a pretty long time, and we can also see on this 1 year chart now that starts in July is that the blackout really does seem to have been a bit of a trigger for problems for bots in EVE Online in general, because here we have a a pretty sharp decline from 4 million to less than 3.5 million. After that we moved sideways up until December, then we went another leg down in January, and now here at the tail end in April we are actually another leg down. So would you say that from 3 million to 2.5 million and a bit above that where we're now is also due to the fight in botting? That's not necessarily true in my opinion. That may be partly due to like the resource crunch and things like that as well, maybe in an even bigger manner than what the dev blog may have shown it to be. My thinking there is, well, you get less tritanium and things like that. They also nerfed anomaly income pretty substantially. And it is not just that there is less ISK coming into the game, but it's also that you have to spend more of your ISK flow, use more of your ISK into the mineral market because of the higher prices as well. And as a result, I do think that a big part here is gonna be the resource crunch that is finally being felt as we plow through the reserves in the first few months after that, which had of course been accumulated during the resource bonanza, which basically lasted up until last year. So right now Plex is going for a bit above 2.7 million in JITA and 2.55 million pretty much for the buyers. If we go to the player owned trade hubs, we go down to less than 2.7 million, and the buyers pretty much stay the same at around 2.55 million. So pretty narrow margin here again. Definitely indeed prices that make it feel like your efforts in EVE Online are very are more rewarded than a year ago. It takes a lot less time to gather 2.7 million compared to 4 million, and of course 500 times that then gives you that month subscription. And as a result, that is definitely something that I've felt as well psychologically. Of course, your time spent in EVE Online means more when Plex prices are down, and right now they're obviously down close to 1 year low points, going for less than 2.7 million. We have not seen that in a long time. The market is hesitating at this point, and of course the real question is, where do we go from here? Does the over inflationary nature of ISK, which they also showed in devblog that the amount of ISK in the game is still steadily going up, will that start to overtake the dynamic, and will we start to see an increase in price? Perhaps, for me personally, perhaps after the summer, that's a possibility. If then we get more activity, more is coming into the game, part of it is going to start to flow back. Or do we see something like perhaps the world next big conflict, World War B2, I think is what some people are calling it. Will that actually have a big impact here as well, where even more ISK has to flow into resources, into rebuilding infrastructure, fleets and things like that, that there will be even less available for Plex? And could we see another leg down in the summer? I think that that's actually a possibility as well. I don't know for sure, but right now I see forces that potentially can move Plex both ways, and so perhaps the net result could be a sideways summer, and then finally an increase in price after activity picks up more after the summer. I do think that that's something we have to keep in mind as well. Generally speaking, the summer is not a great time for Plex because players do tend to drop off in activity. This could be a special summer as well with the real life circumstances, but I do think that when it's 30 degrees I have to be honest, I don't think that I have enough energy to say I'm gonna spend the whole evening playing EVE Online, and I don't think I'll be the only one. So we'll see. It is going to be very interesting. Next up, we have the multiple pilot train certificates. That certificate that's going for around 1.3 billion is basically hovering around that price point. 1.375 billion for the sellers, 1.264 for the buyers, and in the player-owned trade hubs, yeah, competition is actually in JITA for the best price, and we do go down to a bit above 1.3 billion for a couple of sellers in the Tranquility Trading Tower that then go up towards that 137 very quickly. So right now, definitely also the lowest price we've seen for the whole year, although the difference between the start of the year and the current price is less dramatic looking for the trading certificate. After that, we've got the skill extractors, which of course follow the price of Plex very closely. 450 million at the top, 50% decrease to 300 million right now on the chart, and we are selling them for a little bit below 300 million. Buyers are coming in at 290 pretty much, which is of course the same story as Plex in my opinion. Where do we go from here? Well, summertime is right around the corner. If there's less activity, there's bound to be less demand for this. We could move down. If there is, on the other hand, like lots of conflict and things like that, it could that could have very a different impact on skill extractors than on Plex, for instance, in my opinion. So we'll see. The skill injector market next. Here are the large skill injectors that well, have gone from 1 billion to 700 and something ish on the chart as well. Very sharp decline right here during the blackout, down to 800 million, and then again a sideways movement to April, where we have a bit of a cutoff point that is driving the price down even more. So it is not necessarily like a prolonged fight on bots that is the main reason for these declines in prices. Large scale injectors are going for 718 million for the sellers and 691 for the buyers. If we look at this full 1 year chart, buying one below 700 million, in my personal opinion, does make sense. I'm viewing this, as I've said in many ETH talks before, as a very interesting potential investment commodity. Why? Because it is made partly of Plex skill extractors, which is a hedge against inflation, but you also have a bit of speculation on the popularity of the game, on new stuff coming out, and on players desiring more skill points for their characters. And as a result, you have like a part of it that's definitely going to go up in price at some point. Inflation, as I've said, is pretty much inevitable in a currency like ISK, and then of course at the right time you could have that much sharper increase in price, and that's pronounced sell opportunity that'll be a lot more visible, I think, than Plex, for instance. We can also clearly see, if we compare the Plex decrease here and then the skill extractor decrease, where Plex lost also 20%. Actually, that's pretty reasonable, but for these large skill injectors, you'd also have that move straight down, where Plex had a bit of hesitation before hitting 328 and then actually bounced back a little bit. For these large scale injectors, very sharp decline, and I do think that we have potential to have a sharper and basically a straight line up as well, if both of these mechanics, that inflationary cycle and then the need for more skill points in the player base, the more interest in EVE Online in general, if both of those work together, then potentially you've got that very clear sell signal from the market. This is where I actually invested in. I bought my first small skill injector. So these are selling for 146 million. Buyers are coming in at 138 million. I've been trying to update my ticker as well. Small skill injector, I bought one for 139. I think below 140 on this entire chart. At this point already makes sense. Also something that I say, don't pour all your ISK in the market right now. I could be entirely wrong on thinking that we are starting to form a bottom here. Thinking about it now, right, the summer could still be a very rough time, and so make sure that you buy at prices that you're comfortable at, but that you would also be able to perhaps buy a second small scale injector at a 130 or 135 range if that's what happens throughout the summer, for instance. So here that is basically my thinking. I've got my first one below 140. That was way enough below the chart for me to make sense, but you can clearly see on these small scale injector buy prices that you're very likely, well, someone is thinking the exact same thing with 24 of them here, but that if those get purchased, right, if you see some more pressure on the market, you could actually grab them for 138 and things like that as well. So yeah, look into it, but don't go too crazy. After that, we've got the daily alpha injectors that are slowly trying to climb their way back to 40 million ISK, 38 to 39 million for most sellers, and then 34 million for most buyers. Here, very interesting, of course, to see a different dynamic and a different chart from the large scale injectors and the small scale injectors. Main reason for that, of course, is it is a different item. It is not constructed in the same way that a large scale injector is part Plex third-part skill points that have been created by the player base. The daily alpha injectors are basically bought from CCP. As a result, they're their own thing. They also have a different field in which they're used, only alpha clone accounts, and so it's a bit of a different gamble that you take if you buy daily alpha injectors. You're basically gambling on alpha clones, finding reasons to play the game, to stay in the game, and to want a lot of SP, which does tend to be the case at the right time as well, but we don't see this deflationary pressure right now in the daily alpha injectors. We're actually pulling our way back from our low point towards 40 million, which is still 50% off of like a 60 million, which I would say is usually a normal price for daily alpha injectors. At least 50 to 55 should have been closer to the average, but definitely a nice little recovery. Let's see if it has legs. And finally, we've got the hypercore that is continuing to struggle, trying to stay above 280,000 disc, not always succeeding. Nope, sellers coming in at 278 and 270,000 disc, buyers at 243. Yeah, a bit more supply than demand, I guess. Volumes are not that great. It's something that we didn't see in the dev blog, for instance. What are the user stats for the Hypernet relay? There it is. It could be very interesting to see that. On the other hand, CCP is not very likely to share it either. They don't want to give too sensitive information away, which I can understand. And honestly, right, when it was introduced, when CCP said, here is the Hypernet relay, this will allow you to do raffles and things like that, there's been a demand for that in the player base now that all of the gambling websites and things like that have basically been banned from the game. And right away there was quite at least a little bit of panic, I'm gonna say, about, well, introducing gambling, loot boxes and things like that into EVE Online. But I don't think that it was the intention from CCP to start a milking program for the player base through these hypercores. No, it was to meet a certain part of the player base that wanted to do raffles for their alliances, that wanted to have raffles be something that they can once again do in EVE Online, which in and of themselves are not necessarily a bad or a wrong thing. It's just that CCP needed a system where they were in control so that they can guarantee the fairness of the system, which in the Hypernet relay, the odds are always fair. If you've got a 1 in 40 chance, it's because there's 40 tickets, all of them have the exact same price, and so there is no, the bank takes a cut, there is no cheating, there is no, you're not getting the item. None of that happens. And so here the Hypernet relay, I think this decrease in price shows a little bit that it is not something where massive amounts of money is spent, where there's problems with the sandbox and things like that. Nope, it is something that fills a niche in EVE Online, and that probably doesn't have the astronomical user stats that people may have expected or thought CCP was going after when they first heard about the Hypernet relay. So yeah, let's see this as a sign that is filling a niche and not being a problematic part of the game, or the problematic part of the game that people feared. Next up, we have the minerals coming in at 1810. And man, I feel like rambling apparently, because that's definitely a pretty long timestamp. But alright, minerals 1810, let's get started. Here is Tritanium that is continuing its decline and is now hitting 7 ISK, definitely showing that the timing for CCP's dev blog may not have been an accident either. It is pretty clear that up to April, that first quarter for EVE Online, we had a pretty sharp increase in the mineral price index, which made people feel like their time spent mining was finally worthwhile again in the game. And right as it starts to decline, and when it's really showing signs that it's going back to that 7 ISK normal, which is still reasonable for Tritanium, the dev blog comes out saying, hey, look at this number, this is great. People think that spending time in EVE Online is really valuable at the moment. Well, sure, when you get 10 ISK for Tritanium, you do feel like your time spent mining is worth quite a little bit. But this is a sandbox economy, and if inevitably when something starts to be really valuable, more players are drawn to it, and a counter effect starts to take place here as well. So we're seeing more supplies, we're seeing more people mining, and thus the supplies of the goods themselves starts to go up, and price inevitably has to decline. 7ISK is still a good price, but it is not a great price for titanium anymore. Nothing really outside of the ordinary, I'm gonna say. 701 for the sellers and 683 for the buyers. At least the margin is closing as well. Doesn't look like we'll be playing with 5ISK or anything like that anytime soon, but we might go below 7ISK as well, which basically does bring us back to the place that we were at before the resource crunch. Interesting. Let's see if that's confirmed amongst the others. Well, here is Pyrite going back down to 7ISK. We've been there a couple of times, or close to that a couple of times before. It's still 721 for the sellers and 678 for the buyers. So as long as we can defend that 7 to 8 ISK, I think Pyrite is okay. But you can clearly see that the market is testing that 7 ISK boundary, and I feel like once we go below that, yeah, we'll see more selling happening in the 650 ranges, and I will just start to move within that new price range. So again, we're seeing some pressure on Pyrite. There's nothing too dramatic or anything like that just yet, but it is obvious that our time spent mining is starting to go down in value, and that is probably because more people are doing it. Next up here we've got Mexelon also showing a little bit of pressure, but here this is quite relative, of course. We went up to 90 ISK, and this is not in April, so here we actually have a final push up, which is still going to at least support the mineral price index. And if you're mine for Mexelon, obviously we are still selling these at almost 88 ISK, which is a great price, even historically speaking, pretty fantastic. 83 ISK for the buyers above 80 for Mexelon is really a lot of ISK for your time spent there. So right now it's pretty obvious titanium is pulling back. It is by far the most generic and easy to get mineral out there, so as a result it's the first one to start to feel that pressure. Pyrite is showing its first signs as well. Mexelon though is still in a great spot, so if you want to focus on anything at the moment, I would say focus on Mexelon. Isogen is actually doing really good as well, went up to 25 ISK. That's all relative though, going from 15 ISK at the start of the year up to 25 ISK right now, and able to stay there. I think sellers are in fact at 26.55 and then going up to 27 ISK pretty quickly, 24 ISK for the buyers. So it does look like Isogen is coming back, but here we do have to keep the historical perspective in mind. Isogen used to be more expensive than Mexelon. 150 ISK was a normal price for Isogen basically when I started playing, and the first several years that I played EVE Online. So this one has really been dethroned. It is coming back a little bit, and it's doing great on this 1 year chart, but it is definitely not anywhere near its former glory back in the days when mining Isogen basically got you 150 ISK per unit, which is what, 5-6 times what we're getting now. Yeah, that's definitely still devalued from that perspective. After that we have the Noxium market that, alright, tried to bounce back to 350. That I think is good from the perspective of we want, of course, mining to be valuable. 354 ISK for the sellers, 321 for the buyers. So at the high end of the 350, at least we're above where we started the year on. But also, I'll give you guys that historical perspective. Noxium for 1100 ISK used to be a pretty normal state of affairs as well. After that we have the Zydrine market that is now finally breaking down and going away from that 1000 ISK plus range. First sellers coming in 1012, one at 929, that'll get snagged up pretty quickly, and then the buyers are at 929. So a bit of a margin opening up here between sellers and buyers that is putting some pressure on the price, which is not surprising, of course. In a matter of 2 months we go from 625 ISK to a more than 1000, a 1 year high point, very pronounced. We've actually been able to plateau on that for almost a month, so if you're a miner and you're still chasing that value, which of course a lot of players are chasing it, what are you going to try to focus on? Find sources of Zydrine, of course. Your ISK per hour goes up substantially. Find Mexalon, which is at a high point right now. All of that is putting pressure on the price. The real question is, will it also release a little bit of pressure from what we're seeing right now in titanium and in pyrite? Unfortunately, I think those are pretty common, especially when you're hunting for Mexalon. You're almost inevitably going to get some of these as a side product, and so I do think that it could be a little bit of a decline in the value of mining that's gonna come into play, unless the one thing that could really change that would of course be some real action in 0-0, that war kicking off and getting capitals, supers involved. Some losses there could immediately have a big impact on the need for fresh minerals in those 0-0 empires to rebuild their forces, and that could be where we have a real sell opportunity. Right now I'm basically still hoarding my stuff, hoping that that happens at some point. After that, we've got the megasite market, and yeah, here it is showing a completely different story. Went up to 600 ISK, is already declining towards less than 500 on average. Yeah, 534 for the sellers, 477 for the buyers, and here we very clearly see something that is quite different from the Zydrine market. Average sellers 1012, a little bit of above 1000, and your chart is a little bit above 1000. In Zydrine, the sellers dictate the price. They import these minerals and they're saying this is the price, and the market pretty much has to follow. It is very difficult for these buyers at 929 to grab any Zydrine. Megasite, on the other hand, the chart is right in the middle of sellers and buyers, which means that both of them manage to snag supplies from the market, whether it is buyer orders that are being filled by supply, or whether it is these supplies that are being bought by eager buyers. And so that is very, very strange still to me personally. Megasite used to be more expensive than Zydrine. It's half the price now. And I think the comments last week said that in all likeliness it is the resources that are being mined in the Edencom fortress systems, where you do have sources of megasite, sources of morphite that are being brought into the game, that are basically easy, accessible, safe as well, and as a result we have this different dynamic in the megasite market. Finally, we have morphite that is moving its way back to 12,500. It had a pretty sharp decline, of course, losing a quarter of its price in a matter of a couple of weeks. Right now it is selling for 14,720, in fact starting to really go back up here. 11,400 for the buyers. I do think that these Edencom resource spigots could be very short-lived in nature. I do think that CCP has a whole plan that they have ready for how they're going to evolve the conflict between Edencom and the Triglavians, how we'll get the resources, for instance, for the Edencom ships, what kind of a reward structure they want for people that are engaged in that content. And we could still be in the experimentation phase where, all right, here are some Triglavian abyssal resources for you to mine in Edencom fortresses. It's got a little bit of everything. What's the result of that? Perhaps they'll tone that down at some point. They'll definitely need to do something for the salvage, I think, for the Edencom ships and things like that. And so in general, yeah, I don't think that this is gonna be the state of affairs for a very long period of time. And so we could really see a resurgence and a decrease in supply of minerals coming from there. We'll see what CCP decides to do. Next up, the PI market. That's coming in at 27.55. There we go. I think here, you know, if we look at some minerals gaining again, plex still bottom. I don't see any ISK starting to really flow in this unless some investors try to, for instance, grab broadcast nodes below 1.75 million, and it looks like it happened here when we touched that price, but all of these at the moment seem to be rather short-lived. Sellers at less than 1.8 million for broadcast nodes, buyers at 1.7 million. That is definitely very close to 1 year low point, also pronounced by the chart. It's basically really cheap. There's not a lot of demand, and I have started investing small investments, but some investments in some PI materials. For instance, construction blocks here. Oh, okay, well, that was not there yesterday when I was checking the stuff that I bought, but we went to 8,000 disc and we are now actually shooting up all of a sudden. We're still only at 10,000 disc for the sellers, but buyers have been forced to 9,849. And for construction blocks, I bought some for 7,900 discs. So I can definitely grab a 20% profit on those right now if I want to. If I think that this has legs, then of course I should wait. But this is impressive to see the chart work its way back. In fact, a couple of days ago, I didn't see this yesterday, so it's kind of crazy, but all right, this is the situation. A first PI material that actually pulls back from its bottom prices, and in a pretty impressive manner as well. Consumer electronics, well, tried to a couple of times, but to no avail. This is more what I was expecting to see. You get volume increases, prices go back to a price that's still below average, in my opinion, and then new supply just crashes the price back down. Some more investors come in, drive the price back up, but to no avail. Consumer electronics, first seller 8775, well, that'll get snagged up. Let's say 10,300 for the sellers, but 8,774 for the buyers. You're buying consumer electronics below 9,000 disc, which if you look at this chart is pretty cheap. Not yet a 1-year low point, but definitely on the cheap side for the buy prices. After that, we've got coolants that is continuing to struggle, clearly also playing with another low point here. I produced this, so I basically hoard this. 10,300 for the sellers, 8,500 for the buyers. Average price for the year above 11,000 discs. So obviously we have a ways to go here. Crowd protectant solutions, a bit of a boost from, I think, an investor who, in my opinion, will have made the right choice. As I've said last week, I now fully expect at some point implants for the Vorton projector to come in, and so if you bought crowd protection solutions for 100,000 disc, I think you do have a good buy. Right now the market seems to somewhat agree with this. 127,000 for the sellers, 111 for the buyers. There is still a little bit of premium, probably expecting crowd protectant solutions to maintain some of its value and to at some point be really needed for more implants. Enriched uranium, 1-year low point here again, 11,000 for the sellers, less than 10,000 for the buyers. Yeah, if you buy for less than 10,000 disc, I think you can see your potential of 50% pretty clearly, and that is a pretty damn low price. So I'd say I don't produce this, probably gonna be something that I'll look into for another potential buy here. Integrity response drones continuing its slow decline despite being at a 1-year low point already. 1.85 million for the sellers, less than 1.8 million for the buyers, and despite that we still have almost half a page of supply that is still here. So slow investments in these, in my personal opinion, do make sense. Mechanical parts are able to defend 10,000 disc. That's actually pretty impressive. 10,350 for the sellers, 9,700 for the buyers. Definitely not as pronounced an opportunity as enriched uranium. So actually something that I also produce. If I want some ISK out of PI, it would be mechanical parts that I'm selling. Organic mortar applicators, more bad news. When we reached 800,000 discs, someone invested in that and drove the price back up, tried to get to 900,000 discs. Luckily, it doesn't look like they went too crazy with what they bought or up to what price they bought, but it is just to no avail. 843,000 for the sellers, 706,000 for the buyers, and this is exactly why I'm also mentioning in plex stuff and things like that, to not just pour all your ISK in a single opportunity. Sure, 800,000 disc was a 1-year low point. Really looked like a trend break, looked like we would finally find that bottom, but no, 700,000 disc, almost another 10% down, is right now the new normal. And so as a result, if you've bought here for 800,000 disc, I think you'll be very happy to still have some ISK left so that you can try and get that average price down towards 700,000, 750 or something like that. Robotics continuing its struggle around 85,000, so not great, but at least it's not continuing its decline here. Self-harmonizing power core, advanced PI material here, very same pattern. We went down to 1.5 million ISK. You get a volume spike, so some investors came in, but they were smart enough to keep things limited to the 1.75, 1.8 million range. And after that, well, we have new supply coming in, so we're again at 1.7 million for the sellers, 1.6 million for the buyers. It's not that same 1.5 million low point yet, but it is pretty obviously struggling with a lack of demand. Superconductors also, well, actually doing somewhat better, pulling away from 10k. 12,400 is a reasonable price. Less than 10,000 ISK for the buyers is a pretty wide margin between those two again. I produced this honestly on my next visit. I've got some superconductors ready. I'll probably try to sell at least some of them. Then we have the test cultures that went down to one low point of 5,000 ISK and bounced back a little bit from that, but again 5-day moving average already going back down. Less than 10,000 for the sellers, 8,000 for the buyers. So be wary of your investments in PI materials in general. I would say here advanced PI materials, again textbook, going down to less than 1.7 towards 1.7 million, less than 1.75. Very clear 1 year low points. Here the volume spike, it drives the price up a little bit, and where are we at now? 1.73 million for the sellers, 1.7 for one buyer, and then we go down towards 1.6 million pretty damn quickly. So yes, I am also starting to invest in PI materials, but you guys know me. If you follow some of the trade videos, it tends to be like 100 million or something like that, so that I can double down on it and even triple down on it if prices continue to decline. And right now, I would say we're definitely in look for those bargains phases, but make sure that you have some powder left so that you can buy at even better prices down the line. Next up here, advanced moon materials coming in at 35.35. Let's see here, I'm not expecting too good news. Then crystalline carbonite still going down now, getting to that 1 year low point, 132 for the sellers, 126 for the buyers. Definitely pretty low. If you buy below 130, it would make sense to me. I'm just gonna give that same warning as with PI. There is one speculative aspect that could make this worthwhile in the shorter term. That is, of course, that NOSEC action, which could disrupt supplies of some of these goods. But then you need to know where's which alliance, where's gonna be an attack, what could get disrupted. Very difficult to do, but it should be part of your equation, especially if you're in the know. Ferrite carbide also struggling, landing on 125. Not yet a 1 year low point, but 131 for the sellers and 127 for the buyers is pretty low as well. Titanium carbide finally broke down as well below 150. It's trying to make its way back here at the tail end, probably on robuster volumes, and so some investors are making their moves, but 157 for the sellers and 140 for the buyers means that you're definitely still buying if we get 140 to try to show up on a pretty damn low point right now. And then we've got tungsten carbide, right? Also, although it is below 175 and the sellers are back up to 195, less than 180 for the buyers, definitely pretty cheap too. On the metamaterials front, we have photonic metamaterials breaking down, less than 15,000 right now on the 5-day moving average. 15,000 for the sellers, 14,500 for a couple of buyers. So here we're struggling yet again. Then we have the plasmonic metamaterials that are back above 20k. For the sellers, 19,330 for the buyers. So below average, nothing too dramatic here. Non-linear metamaterials staying below average as well, able to defend 20,000 ISK, even on the buy side here, which is pretty impressive. And then we have terahertz metamaterials that is breaking down. 1 year low point, 17,500 on the chart. 18,200 for the sellers, 16,600 for the buyers. Yeah, if you want, to take a gamble here, terahertz metamaterials make sense to me. Crystalline carbonite makes sense to me as well. We still have some other products. Let's see if the pressure keeps coming here. Fermionic condensate, sellers able to defend 80k, but for how much longer with buyers at 62,000? That is going to, in my opinion, break down at some point. Ferrogel also starting to lose some of his value from 40,000 as well. In fact, 37,730 for the sellers here. Fullerides is still doing okay. There's definitely one exception here. 12.25 for the sellers and 1100 ISK for the buyers is well above average and a pretty strong performance. Hypersynaptic fibers struggling, trying to defend 10,000 ISK here. Staying just above that for the sellers and below that for the buyers, but definitely well below average. Nanotransistors also starting to lose some of its feathers. Yep, definitely 5,400. You know, last week we had still 6,000 ISK for the sellers, 5,100 for the buyers, so it's not dramatic, but we're definitely seeing that pressure here as well. And then phenolic composites, we have a bit of a breakdown here. Ouch. 2,000 average price. Now we're at 1660 for the sellers and 1,600 for the buyers. Another one that, you know, if you want to have an investment ready, it makes sense to spend a little bit of ISK here. Ceramic fibers also struggling. 1 year low point is 300 ISK. Buyers are still at 341, a little bit early in my book. But that's obviously the vibe in advanced move materials. We saw this coming. It was starting to build where we had like a small window of maybe a couple of months there where we had some volatility, and that volatility was around the average prices for the year. But eventually, of course, pressure started to mount, and now we're starting to see the results of that, with some of them breaking down and showing 1 year low points as well. It's a little bit risky, in my opinion, to really invest in this because it's just more maturation, I'm gonna say, of all of these supply lines. There is this one wrench that could be thrown in the machine, and that is, of course, a big conflict in 0.0. Will it happen? Will they commit? I personally, of course, hope so, because, you know, it's a great business opportunity every single time, but will it happen? Well, we'll see. We'll see if CCP will successfully be able to, or if the players can find the motivation to get that big war going, or if there's now enough reasons in EVE Online to actually get all of that conflict going. We're still not at the dynamic resource situation which CCP has promised for the longer term. That could be the where we will really see conflict drivers take hold in the game. This will be just interesting. The players will have to, in my opinion, do it on their own if they're going to war, let's say this summer. Take two ships next, coming in at 41 minutes. There we go. Let's go over these now. On this one, we're also starting to see some real pressure. Here is the Ares selling now for 23 million, with still 528 of them here. Less than 21 million for the buyers, and now I'll have my ticker open a little bit here as well. So this is the folder where I've got purchases that are finished. I bought Ares for 22 million. So on this downturn here, I think looked good, right? Very close to 1 year low points, but yeah, right now we have to be a little bit more careful, and so we should be ready to try and maybe purchase even more of them if we really want that Tick 2 investment to pay off for the longer term. But right now, yeah, this is a lot of pressure. Ares at the 1 year low point, and who knows when the bottom will be formed. After that, we have the Basilisk. That's still holding at 200 million ISK, 203 for the sellers, 181 for the buyers. I do think that logistics cruisers are still doing a little bit better because they definitely have their place in the oncoming conflict, 0.0 in general, but also in, of course, the new content with the Triglavians and Edencom at the moment. So I think here a real drop-off would be a nice opportunity, but it's gonna be a little bit harder for that to materialize. Cerberus staying below 230 million ISK, 200 million at the low end. Yeah, 197 million for the buyers, 224 for the sellers. Pretty wide margin between buyers and sellers, but if you can snag a Cerberus below 200 million, it does make sense. Although I have purchased it for like 185 and things like that. So not as clear as the Ares. For the Crow, we are continuing to decline here as well. In fact, we're heading towards 20 million, 23 million for the sellers, 21 million bit below that for the buyers. And look at that, still 533 here. So if you want to start purchasing these, it makes sense, but it's that very same morning. Make sure that you can still buy even lower, because right now we're basically seeing way too much supply in all of these interceptors. The Guardian is basically starting to land from its spike up to 300 million ISK. 204 for the sellers and 183 for the buyers, and you can see here that I bought the Guardian for 184 million. So you can still undercut my buy price as well, but you can also see that the margin between sellers and buyers is already pretty high. So it's going to be, I think, very difficult to actually get a buy here. You can see the averages are staying above 200 million, so that is really all the action is going here. But you know, there is still that opportunity potentially for you to get a cheap Guardian as well, which makes sense. I bought it, and yeah, in 0-0 conflicts, the Guardian fleets are definitely a thing as well. For the Hawk, we have a sideways movement at this low point, just above 30 million for the average price, 31.5 for the sellers, 28 million for the buyers, and I bought one for 29 million. So what we can clearly see here is that I think it's a couple weeks at this point, I did come in here, try to snag some of these low points for the Tech 2 ships, and I've probably been a little bit early. On the other hand, I've had a pretty easy time picking those up as we were going down. You can see that the pressure is still there. It's going to be, I think, a lot harder for you to grab a Hawk close to 28 million than it was for me to buy the one that the two I think that I got for, or the four I think, I'm not even sure, we'll have to check later, but to grab Hawks at 29 million. So keep this in mind. Timing is also very important, and I don't always hunt for that very best price either. Then here we get the Heretic. This is going to be a little bit more interesting, of course. We went down to less than 60 million ISK, and we have a sharp increase in price. Unfortunately, it looks like I'm being undercut already. Let's take a quick look at trying to sell. Yeah, bought one for 52 million and I tried to sell for 89 million, and it looks like I'll be stuck with this for quite a bit, because they've come in very quickly and they're driving the price back down to 78 as well. So I basically did try to take advantage of the spike and the lack of supply in the Heretic that formed, but it looks like I was just too late for the 90 million ISK prizes there, which would have almost doubled my money. That would have been really good, but yeah, competition has seen that and will squash this increase in price pretty damn quickly. Well, I'll leave the sell order. You never know when a double bounce happens, and you still grabbed it. In fact, that's exactly what happened with my buy order for the Guardian. I tried to buy for 184 right here in April, I think it was. It didn't happen, but after this spike we were so oversupplied that finally my buy order triggered. So patience can be rewarded as well. After that, we have the Hound chart that, well, we have some investments in here as well as we reach another low point. So this to me completely makes sense. We're back up to 26 million, which is still not great. 23.5 million for the buyers, and ticker right here. And then we're looking for Hound. I bought Hounds for 22 million. Now, it's not yet the spike where we're gonna sell, but it's pretty obvious that we're playing with low points here, and that some investors are also, and even some big investors, this is bound to be an alliance getting ready to get some Hound fleets out there. The Ishtar is back on the low end here, back below 230 million ISK, 222 for the sellers, 207 for the buyers. I'm gonna need a sharper and more pronounced one-year low point before I start to see an investment purchase or an Ishtar purchase as an investment. But if you want to buy one, this is the time to do so. It's a great PvE ship in general. My latest video, right, I talked about giving yourself options. You guys know that we have several bases of operations around New Eden where we have jump clones ready, and yes, I do have an Ishtar for exploration in all of those bases. So if you want to basically have another one and perhaps move it to one of your bases of operations, it's a good time to buy one right now, because well, you'll probably be able to grab it for like 10 to 15, something like that, well below average. Manticore next, also starting to form a bottom just above 25 million ISK, 27 for the sellers, 24 for the buyers, and we do come from above 30 million, and if I'm not mistaken here I bought and sold with like a 4-5 million ISK margin between them, so I don't have anything on the Manticore right now. Munin continuing a slow breakdown towards 200 million, 217 for the sellers, 203 for the buyers. It's basically just more supply that is causing the price to increase. Here we can see that this regularly has volume spikes. So what probably happens is once sellers go low enough, there's someone that comes in, probably for an alliance or something like that, and then that buys, let's say, 210 million up to 220, and then rinse and repeat as supplies keep outstripping the regular markets. The Nemesis is flat at 25 million as well. 25.5 for the sellers, 21.6. Do I have any? Nope, I do not. Then we have the Oneros that is doing a little bit of a bounce from its 180 lows. Also slight volume increase. So some people did gamble on cheap Oneroses. It is still very cheap, 189 million for the sellers, 158 million for the buyers. You're buying below 160, which is right here on the chart. But keep in mind, even this volume bounce is only 25 ships trade, so it's very difficult to actually get your sale to trigger. Purifier flattening out at 25 million as well. Look at that, 557 here too. So 26.6 for the sellers, 23.4 for the buyers. And Purifier, do I have any of those? Yeah, bought for 23 million. So I think I'm ready for conflict there as well. Then we have the Saber. Did see a little bit of a volume spike that did not do really anything on the price. We're around 60 million for the sellers, 55 million for the buyers. And Saber, I have one for 57 million, so definitely bought a little bit early there, but I was happy to buy below 60 million for the longer term, I think. Scimitar also bouncing off the 200 million mark, 188 for the buyers. Yeah, here you could definitely try to grab a cheap one. And then finally we have the Zarmast that is flattening out and staying below 400 million ISK at 375 for the sellers, 335 for the buyers. So the Take-Two ship market is pretty interesting right now if you're looking for those bargains. But you know, it seems to be in quite a few of these sections that it is like that. But keep in mind, longer term, definitely not super short term. There is one difference, of course. Take-Two ships and an active war in 0-0, those do go very well together. So I would definitely prefer buying some Take-Two ships and hope for the conflict than to buy advanced move materials and hope for the conflict, or to buy PI and hope for the conflict to increase the prices. So if you're looking for the shortest term potential rewards, I do think the Take-Two ships are what you should be looking at. This is a personal preference, so I may be completely wrong on that, but that's my view of it, and that is why I actually have bought quite a few of these specifically frigates, mostly because you do clearly see Ares bottom prices 527 here. Then we have Hounds, no Hounds not, but I think it was Purifier 557 here. Oops, and I had to look here. There we go, Crow 553 here. There is just so much on the market that right now you are able to buy real bargains. Next up, Take-3 ship market, 51.25. But I will drink a little bit first because I have been going for 15 minutes. All right, let's get to these. As I said last week, I was starting to expect normalcy to return, and for the Confessor, I do think that this is starting to happen. 37.5 million for the sellers, 32.5 million for the buyers, so healthy margin. And look at this supply. Last 24 hours, we're well below 40 million. We're not seeing a lot being brought in. 49 here, 11 here. Everything else seems to be quite low, so we are in decently normal supply numbers for what I would call a below average price. Next up here we get the Hecate. That's actually finally breaking down below 40 million as well. 38 million for the sellers, 34 million for the buyers. So still a little bit more supply here. And you can clearly see that in the last 2 days we get some more supplies coming in, which is of course the people still trying to get that 40 million, 38 million. They brought those to the market. And so this is also normalizing with a bit more supply left than the Confessor, because it's a little bit fresher on that below 40 million range. Then here we've got the Jackdaw that is still going for 50 million, 45 million on the buyers. And look at that massive volume increase, which correlates finally with something that makes sense, higher prices. And so I think this is going to be preparation for Null-Sec conflict potentially. Jackdaw is an incredible platform, of course, can fire at very long ranges, strong shield tank, very versatile. Makes a lot of sense. And now, of course, what we can start to hope is that the Jackdaw will start to really dominate the supply lines, and you can already see in the last 24 hours we have half a page with 52 as the latest order. So this does happen pretty quickly as expected in a good working market. This will get squashed very quickly, but hopefully it'll give a little bit of breathing room for the Confessor, for instance, to get back closer to 40 million. Same thing with the Hecate to stop its descent here. Let's hope that that does happen. The upcoming weeks are going to be very interesting to see if we do finally have that normalcy again in the tactical destroyer market, which leaves us with the Zwepel. And here, well, we are still struggling, but it is the least popular one. 35 million for the sellers and 29 million now for the buyers. No news, well, a little bit of new supply in the last week coming in. You can clearly see that the numbers are lower than the rest though. And I'll be honest, right here, Zwepel for 32.5 million. I clearly bought too early, hoping that what we would actually see is that the supplies in the Confessor and the Hecate that were driving the price down to less than 40 million ISK would give more breathing room to the Zwepel. That unfortunately has not materialized. That's it is what it is. Hopefully at some point an alliance does come in and does the same thing as what happened to the Jackdaw, so that I can still sell at a profit. But it does look like that 40 million average price for tactical destroyers is actually wrong. It is in all likeliness below 40 million for most, and perhaps even a couple million below that, 35-ish for the Zwepel. So here I probably made a little bit of a mistake buying that Zwepel too early, or maybe even buying that Zwepel in general. I'm now dependent on a big buyer, a big jump of interest in the Zwepel for that ship. After that, we've got the cruisers. Legion slowly making its way back to 140 million, 135 for one seller, but then 140 for most, 126.8 for the buyers, and I bought my Legion for 135 million. So same story here. I bought a little bit too early. Yeah, if you look at this chart and you try to get 135 to show on it, it's probably still down here. So you're still able to buy at these really low prices. And here again, also one thing to perhaps keep in mind, I think it's on this decline here. Or was it this one? I'm not sure anymore. But I bought while the price was really declining. You can clearly see now that prices are hesitating a little bit. Average price 140, sell price 140. It is a lot harder now to grab those legions than it was when I was purchasing them, which makes sense, of course. It's really hard to get the real bottom of any market. After that, we have the Loki that is still struggling to pull away from 150 million ISK, 164 for the sellers, 147 for the buyers. So here you can definitely still grab Loki's very close to 150 million, and that is what I did. Loki right here for 150 as well is my purchase. Basically, I took two gambles in the tactical cruisers. I'm hoping that they pay off at some point. But we'll see. I do need another increase in price to happen, and honestly I don't have any good explanations for the previous ones that happened in these markets. Proteus is actually shooting up a little bit, but yeah, this range is a lot worse than the Legion and the Loki. Right now selling for 163, buyers are at 148, and then the Tengu is actually slowly landing on 150 million ISK as well. 160 for the sellers, 139 for the buyers. Eventually, I will also train into the Tengu because it is an amazing PvE platform as well. That's still something that I need to do, in fact, on my main character, get all of those Tech 3 cruisers trained. But yeah, the the Tech 3 market, I feel, is coming back into that. The Tactical Destroyer market will have normal market mechanics. This Jackdaw spike should really stop the decrease in price for the Confessor and the Hecate. The Zwepel is struggling a little bit, but hopefully it gets a little bit of breathing room from Jackdaw as well. And now we once again see this, opportunities being snagged up by alliances, but not going too crazy with the prices. And then of course fresh supply very quickly actually plugging those gaps, which will then hopefully be shown in the other charts there as well. And that leaves us with the extra product for this week at 58.20. And I do want to cover the Edencom ships a little bit, because I made this video when it was really new about the crazy prices that they were going for, but things evolve very quickly. So Navy faction, here is the Skybreaker, started at 1.5 billion on the first day, is currently selling for 44 million. So supplies do seem to be plentiful. I'll be honest, 44 million for a new frigate here doesn't seem that unreasonable to me personally anymore. I think like the Comet is a very good one, 14 million, so we still have a ways to go. Firetail at 10 million, but at least this doesn't feel like it's a crazy price anymore. I would, if you really want to fly one, I'd be willing to pay 44 million to fly a Skybreaker. Then we have the Stormbringer right here. Same thing, started at 750 million ISK. And is now going down, landing on the chart at 130, but sellers are coming in at 107 million, 85 million for the buyers. 100 million for a fresh cruiser, something new to experience. Honestly, not out of line in my personal book anymore. We'll do a quick comparison. Caracal Navy issue, 50% cheaper. Vexor Navy issue, 50% cheaper. Again, showing that it is still not probably where CCP wants them. I do think that they'll want them eventually to be in line with the other Navy faction ships, but it's already quite a lot more reasonable. One thing that I didn't check is the battleships, so faction battleships, Navy factions. Thunderchild. Alright, so started at 1.75 billion, is currently selling for less than 300 million ISK. Well, I'd have to do the comparison. Raven at 400 million, Megatron at 500 million. So I'm going to say, yes, this is already a very reasonable price for the Thunderchild as well. Wish I had the skills, then I would probably just buy one to have fun with it and fly it around. Because it is definitely a unique thing as well, and this one does have a little bit more room in its fitting and things like that. Gonna be interesting to see if there is a war that breaks out in the summer. Will these ships already find their way into the fleets and the engagements there? But I definitely want to give you guys basically this update, while on the frigates and the cruiser front there is still room for them to go down in order to just get in line with the faction frigates. All these prices do already feel very, very reasonable. On the other hand, I'm going to quickly do Vorton just to give you guys the bottleneck here. Will probably be stuff like this. If you want to, for instance, be able to fly the Stormbringer with Tech 2 weapons, well, 800 million ISK for the skill. It still feels a little bit expensive. On the other hand, this is also a one-time purchase for most players, so this ought to be able to go down in price pretty quickly. Small Vorton specialization, yeah, there's one here for 1 billion ISK in the perimeter trading tower, and it is still selling for pretty damn crazy. Vorton amplification, I think, is one, 230 million ISK for what's basically a base skill. Super expensive. So yeah, if we look at these ships, they are now quite a lot more reasonable in price, but the problem is going to be these skill books still seem to be very rare and very expensive. So I'm still at the moment on my main character training up the skills that I received from CCP, and I think I have the patience to wait for better times on the skill books yet. I may start to buy the ships though, and maybe buy some fittings and things like that, just to have those ready whenever the skills will allow and whenever I feel like finally giving them a go. But it's heading in the right direction. I personally am also really curious to learn about what CCP is planning to do for their industrial for basically the whole process needed for these Edencom ships and the Vorton projector and things like that. Where do the resources come from? It's going to be interesting to see how that evolves as well. And yeah, that's going to be it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.